Welcome, Chris. Welcome, everyone, at the Kunsthalle Wien, at the exhibition, L'Exposition Imaginaire. The exhibition is a strange exhibition in the sense there are no artworks, but we are in a big room with a big screen, a stage, and the exhibition is developed through a very intense number of talks with different practitioners from the art, mostly curators, art historians, a few artists, and the idea of the project is trying to think about, from different perspectives, about how the digital affected the art, the artworks, the institutions, the role of the audience, and all the implications that are connected to this. And so tonight we have the pleasure of having with us, unfortunately only via Skype, Chris Fitzpatrick, who is with us now from a hotel room in Rome. Lucky him. And I'm going to introduce him briefly with his official biography. Chris Fitzpatrick was born in 1978 in New York and has been the director of the not-for-profit Contemporary Art Center in Antwerp Objective Exhibitions since 2012. He is now the director of the Kunstverein in Munich. After receiving an MA from California College of Arts in 2009, he gained recognition for developing unconventional exhibition formats, often experimenting with the temporality of exhibitions. He has lent his artist-centric curatorial approach to exhibitions with Nina Bayer, Bruce Conner, Mark Dion, Paul Elliman, Jos de Gruyter and Harald Thies, that we know pretty well, João Maria Guzmão and Pedro Paiva, Angie Kiefer, Rosalina Shashibi, Iza Tarasevic, and many others. His writing and interviews have been published in many magazines like Spike Art Quarterly, Passmaker, Nero, Mus, L'Uomo Vogue, Philip, The Federal, Cura, the Baltic Notebooks of Anthony Blunt, Art Papers, as well in many catalogs and books. So this was the official biography. The alternative one is Chris Fitzpatrick organized exhibitions, booth trophy-thon, and events. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much, Luca. I think that second biography is from when we met in 2010. I haven't had a chance to organize any booster fidonic processions in a while, but it's great to be here in this strange situation, Skyping from a hotel room in Rome with my giant head behind you.
Yeah, so we have the first problem with sound. I cannot hear you properly, but can you hear me sharply?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, good. So,
is it too quiet? Is it too quiet or is it cutting out, the sound?
Sorry?
Is it too quiet or is the sound cutting out?
No, the sound is quite good. I think only the connection, I don't know if it's like the best, but let's try. So, I'm now sharing the screen so you can see the websites. And of course, I'll be curious to discuss with you about how, let's say, the issues related to this exhibition, L'Exposition Imaginaire, so also the idea of dematerialization, also how, all these phenomenon are, in a way, how do they play in your practice as curators, and now also, since now a few years, director of two institutions, very different ones. And so I think would be interest to have a kind of journey through several projects you have done, and from when you were in San Francisco till now your experience in Munich. So basically, we have on the big screen the web page of the Showcase 13, and so I can now let the floor to you.
Okay, thanks so much. I thought that the topics that you guys were discussing with your project were so vast and open-ended that to try to tailor it into something a little bit more concrete, I would just talk about the three spaces that I could say that I had something to do with the direction of. The first one was SC13, and I think that relates interestingly, at least for me, because it's a project that very few people saw. It was really taking place on the outskirts of San Francisco. And it was taking place in a giant warehouse, which was called the San Francisco Antique and Design Mall. And at that time, it was something like 30,000 square feet of space that had been partitioned into booths, much like an art fair. And those booths were filled with all kinds of crap. I mean, some were, very nice mid-century vintage furniture. Another one might be, just all the Life magazines, that this person had collected over the years. And what was more interesting to myself and my collaborator, Post Brothers, was actually the walls, the perimeter space, which were actually lined with a series, hundreds of them actually, of vitrines that were vertically oriented. And we started to go there, and we got friendly with the owners. We applied for a small grant in San Francisco and received it. And we started to rent the Showcase 13, number 13 of the hundreds of vitrines that they had. We kind of cleared it out and started to make a 6-month exhibition of kind of like a micro sculpture exhibition. But basically what we wanted to do was really just inhabit this space that was normally prescribed for the selling of antiques and collectibles and souvenirs, kind of empty that space out so that we would kind of like, let's say, parasitically occupy that space like a kind of alien. And so the people who did actually come came regularly, and we would make changes within the space about every week or every 3 weeks at least, where we would rotate in different objects by international artists. We had about 20 or so artists that were in the show. And then finally, by the end of the exhibition, we actually filled it with a kind of like mini retrospective of what had happened, like a kind of going out of business sale. But what's interesting is that all that really remains of this show now is this website, which we designed ourselves. It's not very good. I think we used some kind of Apple template, iWeb something. And unfortunately, all that's on that website are these little thumbnail JPEGs. You didn't even make a publication out of it. And so that just goes to show that, the importance of documentation nowadays. This wouldn't, I don't think, it be accepted to Contemporary Art Daily, which is one of the sites that you guys mentioned in your because it's not high res enough. And so I think that experience kind of inflected what happened with Objectif exhibitions. So by the time that I had moved to Antwerp, it's now about 2 years later. I started there in January of 2012. And this is the archived website that we made during those years with Gola Petite. And originally it was just designed to be a one-page, endless scrolling page of events, exhibitions, publications, whatever they were. They should all be having the same stature, let's say. That was kind of the point of the program. But in this case, what I did was I learned from the board and from talking to people that Antwerp, of course, being quite centrally located geographically in Europe, a lot of people are passing through Belgium all the time, especially with Brussels being right next door, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Paris, London, whatever. But at the same time, I learned that the majority of Objectif's visitors were actually visiting it through its website or through some kind of secondary mediation. And can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Luca?
Yeah.
Okay, I got a notice on the screen. Yeah, so something about this kind of extremely oh shit. Are you there still?
Yeah, I'm here. I think I cannot
Okay,
see
great.
you, but we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, but anyway, the ideas behind how the images that we would present, this came from its location, from being a place that's kind of central and also kind of out of the way. And so all the texts were kind of heavily encrypted texts, so that we've thought of that as one form of communication. And then at the same time, the photographs were quite plentiful, so that you could kind of see a lot of what was going on. But at the same time, if you didn't really come and experience the space in person, then you wouldn't really have a sense of what those texts were really about. So the mediation was pretty key there.
Who designed the website?
The website was designed by Batista, who's a designer who, at the time that I met her, was living in Vilnius, but she was also moving to Brussels around the same time as me. And so we worked on that together. And she would produce printed publications once a year, and each one of those publications would fit into the one from the previous year. And she also produced A4s for each show, which we would pass out. So the economy of the space, it's not a place with massive budgets, was also a factor into how we would communicate and how we would mediate.
And
so I think that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Because looking at the program of objective exhibitions, as far as I remember, there was several exhibitions dealing with time, so they were not kind of exhibitions with a classical, like, I don't know, a month or 2 months duration, but also there was really kind of process-based, in the sense that we're developing also in a very kind of erratic way, especially I think the Nina Bayer exhibition, Nina Bayer project, or
Sure.
how to define it. And so I would like to ask you to talk about that specific project, and in terms of the idea of dematerialization, which is in a way connected also to the digital, let's say, issue, and the exhibition that Daniel Turner, who is a young American artist, did in the space, I think is also pretty like a good example regarding that. But let's start from Nina's exhibition.
I think that those are two really interesting examples that you pulled out of all the things that we did, because Nina's exhibition was 4 years long, and one of the works that Daniel made was done in about 4 seconds. So that shows the kind of span that we were working in. Nina's was kind of like almost like the core thing that was happening for the entire time that I was there. And we had worked together in a lot of group contexts before, but when it came time to figuring out what sort of a solo exhibition we would do, because that's the mandate of Objectif, that you make solo exhibitions, she asked me a really interesting question, which was, what's the full length of your contract? And I said, well, I'm contracted for 4 years. So we decided right there, why don't we do that? Because we knew we wanted to make an exhibition which was also about making a kind of contract between an institution and an artist, or a curator and an artist, and a certain level of dedication to which you would actually work with that artist for a protracted period of time, let the project develop over time. So what we did was, in the first year, there was a series of sculptures produced, which she calls facing figures. And basically what you would do is purchase a bust from another artist, an anonymous bust that no one knows who made it, and then cut the face off at a flat angle. And then that has to be put inside of a window, so that the face is then contained, or the gap where the face used to be is then contained, and you can see the perimeter, the raw perimeter of the material. And then we would ask our neighbors, because Objectif is below 5 floors of residential apartments, if they would participate and let us put them in their windows. And at first we only had one window, and by the end there was about 15 different 15 different windows of different people who were participating. And in the second year, she moved her work into my apartment, actually, and it was a different series of works, which were giant frames in which she would stuff clothing, but only clothing that depicted animal prints, some kind of skeuomorphic print. And then those would be pushed behind the glass and it would create something quite painterly. And those would be then put in my apartment and was viewed only by appointment. And then in the third year, what she did was there's a tunnel that goes under the river in Antwerp, and she produced about 32 different posters, a kind of familiar motif from stock photography, where you have a woman laying on a table being massaged, but with these hot rocks on her back. So Nina did that, but with giant boulders, and made it look quite similar. And then we put those into the normal advertising kiosks that people would see as they were going down the escalators in this kind of 1930s beautiful tunnel that goes under the river. And finally, in the fourth year, she decided to truncate her project and did just a 6-week show where she showed something called grounds, which were a series of brass or bronze sculptures of dirt, which are basically like when you see a man on a horse, that horse is standing on what looks like a representation of earth, of dirt. And but of course it's the same material and it's produced structurally, but it also has an aesthetic. And so she had these kind of like islands surrounding the space. So that was a project that you really couldn't see in one glimpse, and you can get a sense of it through photographs. But it's a project that really tests the limits of how you can document a project that spans 4 years.
But in 2014, you had the chance to see the sculptures produced like 3 years before, or each exhibition, after each exhibition, the next one, was an addition, or just a slot of 4 things?
Oh, yeah. Well, we decided from the beginning that we would do 4 years, but we also decided from the beginning that each year she would show a different series, and that each year we would produce a different series with her. So every year was a different series of works, but we also didn't know the full trajectory of how it would play out. So it was always a response to the previous year and the different things that had taken place over that year. And then, of course, after that was all over, those works then diffuse out into the world. And so it was quite cool because Kunstverein in Hamburg had an exhibition of Nina's work, quite a extensive show of her work. And they showed the grounds in there. So then you could see the grounds again, but in a totally different context. And that was also part of her idea, was that, this 4-year relationship, then I leave Objectif, her exhibition ends, and all those works that we produced kind of go back out into the world.
And it was
that was very different from Daniel Turner.
And it was always advertised in the space, the exhibition by Nina?
It was always advertised in Objectif exhibitions, but when it was in my apartment, there was no way anyone would know that from the street. And when it was in the tunnel that went under the river, there was absolutely no reference to it whatsoever, because she wanted it to operate kind of on its own terms, as images that are in context, and images that are in context with other advertisements from other things that are completely unrelated. So it couldn't be mediated.
Was only through the website that you can, in a way, be aware of this project. I wonder if instead, like walking into the space, if there was an exhibition of, I don't know, Ewan MacDonald, there was always, somewhere indicated that then there was this ongoing exhibition by Nina. Or instead was really addressed to an audience, to a kind of general audience, or someone who's really like into, I don't know, looking at the website, discovering this project, and then really committed to then, I don't know, going to your apartment to see the works or so ever.
Yeah, probably the element of that exhibition that was seen the least would be the one that was in my apartment. And then the one that was seen the most was for sure the one in the tunnel, because about 10,000 people go through that tunnel every day. And over time, it grew and grew and grew as we could get more of the advertising kiosks. So basically, the way you would know about it was either through our newsletter, through our website, or if you came to our space, we always had vinyl on the wall, which listed the different exhibitions. And Nina's name was always on the wall for the whole 4 years.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the graphic design also was always really key, and working with Goda in a way was, we always had to. She had a hard time because she would have to find solutions for all these weird things that we were doing. Like we had a 9-hour exhibition, we had a 4-year exhibition. So she did a good job of always finding a way to kind of give these things visibility. And sometimes it would be just through a tiny little ad in De Witteraf, this free publication, or other times it would be through the A4s or through the website. We also did videos in some cases and showed those on Vimeo, like for Trussell Kills, her exhibition. Because that was the funny thing about Objectif also, is that like all of a sudden some artists would like see that Nina had a long show, and the next thing you know, there's like another long show. So then we had this problem with our floor, and so when Cecile Kill's exhibition was coming, she actually used her production budget to fix our floor, but then that floor became a permanent work by her. So then her name was also on the board all the time, and it kind of grew like that.
Was the exhibition review as just one body, or like in 4 different exhibitions? You got a review as a kind of 4 years project, or I'm curious to know like what was, if you have any kind of, in terms of review, since it's also an exhibition testing the limits or at least the rules of how institutions and I don't know, the press, everything works, that you open an exhibition, you send out the documentation, magazines rights, or now we have websites publishing images of that. How did it work at that time? Because you started in 2012, and at that time I don't remember if you already had like the trend and the mass presence of all these digital websites from Contemporary Art Daily and all the rest of the families.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had some shows would be reviewed by Contemporary Art Daily, or I mean, it's not really reviewed; it's more like posted. But then we had at least one review of Nina's project, which was in Metropolis, and I think that they reviewed it at the moment after 2012.
And what do you think?
Are you there?
Sorry.
So at the time, yeah, so I could just hear some kind of noise. But when they reviewed it, we had already done the facing figures, and we were just about, and we had already done it in my apartment, and we were about to open it in the tunnel that went under the river, but it hadn't opened yet. So what they did was they reviewed it so far, and they posted a picture of the courtyard, and that helped a lot, because then a lot of people started to ask questions about it, and I think some people even made special trips to come and see the posters in the tunnel, and we would do tours through the tunnel a few times. Where we just start at the top on one side, walk up to the other side, have a look at Antwerp from across the river, and then reverse back the same way.
Where you also, when you start to run Objectif, you were also thinking, or was an issue for you as a director, thinking about how to document the exhibition, what kind of documentation offering to this more experimental format of exhibitions, like thinking that images might not be the best or the unique way of transmitting them and spread them around, or I don't know, thinking let's document all our program through words instead of images, which is something that in a way is what you told me before. Is true that, but this is more about, in a way, writing and the press release in a less ordinary way. But I thought if you were, or if you ever thought about doing something even radical in terms of documentation, of not sending out images, but something different, because it's not easy to document exhibitions like using time as mediums, even if in the case of Nina, the time is in a way is the frame within the work, and the exhibition is developed through, but because then objects are really part of the works as well. But this is just a curiosity, knowing also your attitude and how also you are like into this sort of derive. It makes sense or not? Because I hear you so bad that it's like talking with the ghost of James Lee Byers.
Can you hear me at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so in 2012, what we did was Post Brothers and I, we made an interview where we talked about everything that had been done in 2012. And that was a 12,000 word document, which we also considered as a kind of alternative form of documenting what had been done. I think that ultimately the images that we produced around objectif exhibitions were maybe a little bit too stuck in the kind of standardized norms which were developing at that time. I think that we worked with a very nice photographer for sure, but it really was kind of standard installation shots and this sort of thing. Whereas now in Kunstverein München, we have a new photographer who came in with me called Johannes Schwartz. And he comes from Amsterdam, and the way that he shoots images, it's really much different. He really kind of breaks the space up and breaks the show up into pieces that work as images, rather than trying to make images do the work of your eyes, because of course they're two different things. And so far, I think it's working much better with Johannes in terms of really trying to see what these shows look like.
And going back to the objective for a second, I'm curious to know more about the Daniel Turner exhibition. That, for example, I experienced only through the images, and yeah, so my sensorial perception are only limited to a small JPEG of 700 K
pixels.
Pixels.
Well, in that show, he had basically done two gestures, and one of them was what he calls a mercury release, where he stood on a ladder and unscrewed one of the fluorescent light bulbs and then dropped it on the floor, which of course creates something like a line drawing from the chalk that's in sort of chalky-like substance that's inside of a fluorescent light. But at the same time, it also is a sort of performative registration, and then it also releases a trace amount of mercury into the air. So I think he was interested in that there's a kind of unseen volume floating in space that's potentially harmful. And then there was another gesture he did where he spent 12 hours kind of doing this action lying on the floor, and he was wearing this sort of black sweatshirt that he kept rubbing himself against the wall and producing a kind of registration on the wall of his presence and of his movements. Now, he had previously done that mostly using steel wool, but somehow through our conversations, it seemed like he wanted to remove the instrument because that would be too similar to like a paintbrush or something. So instead, he just used himself. So both were kind of like registrations where when you came to the opening, you didn't actually see them being done, you just saw the effect of them. And then no documentation of them actually being produced was allowed. And then he actually made the image selection himself, was really particular about which images we would put online.
And going instead back to the Kunstverein Munich program, which is pretty fresh because you moved to Munich. You were appointed when exactly?
Well, I got the job in 2014, but I moved there in January of 2015, and then we started in March with the new program.
So what was the first project that you did there?
Well, the first thing that we did was started a program in this thing we call the Schaufenster am Hofgarten, which is like a window onto this garden that our space is located in. And they've been used a little bit over the years, but now it's like kind of regularly programmed every 6 weeks or so with another exhibition. And so the first thing that I did was I brought actually the work that we had commissioned from Angie Kiefer's second part of our exhibition in Objectif, and brought that to Munich and showed that first, because I wanted there to be some kind of continuum. And also it makes sense for Angie because she only wants to exhibit it in major financial centers. So it made sense for it to be in Munich. And also it's a photograph that is a registration of an action she did in New York, in the Hudson area, where two houses that had been extremely dilapidated houses that had been condemned, she painted them entirely in gold automotive paint as a kind of response to the city's not exactly legitimate stalling of the owner of those houses' plans to make those houses into affordable housing. And so it's this kind of, he commissioned her to make a sort of response, and then we commissioned that as part of the exhibition. So that was the first thing we showed. And the first really large exhibition that we made in the main space was with the artist Annemie van Kerkhoven. And she's an artist from Antwerp who has, for many, many years, been really a kind of pioneer in digital technologies, even in the 70s. She really opened a lot of doors for other female artists in the area, and she works in nearly every medium. So this was like really a sort of like an exhibition that I wanted to do for about 3 years with her. And when it finally happened, it was like one of the most sort of wide-ranging of her exhibitions, and people really got a sense of all the stuff she had really been doing over the years. We really dug deep in her basement, and I was lucky she let me show a lot of things that she hadn't shown before or hadn't shown for maybe 20 years. And then we also produced a publication for that, which is like an extension of the exhibition. And that's a series that we do now. It's called the Companion Series. So that is sort of in tandem with the images that Johannes takes. We don't include those in the book. Those are really just for online, for people to see, and also for our own archives. But the books themselves are really more like usually an extension of the exhibition. We put things in those books that don't sit as well in an exhibition context. So sometimes like, graphic design of Annemie van Kerkhoven, writing of Annemie van Kerkhoven. This was like a kind of 4-year chronological core sample or X-ray of her practice that our graphic designer Julie Peters has made with Annemie. And so now we make one of those for every one of our quarterly exhibitions. So we made one for Annemie van Kerkhoven. We made one for Sudoku, which was 3 artists, Rosalind Nashashibi, Renee Levy, and Gintras Disapatrius. And then for Dexter Sinister, and then this year for Ola Vasilyeva, and for Otarkino, which is a collective of chefs and a film curator who make these very experiential evenings. So it's a little bit different now in Munich, because it's a really like kind of three-pronged approach to the identity, which is of course like the sort of way that people can remotely view what we're doing without coming there. And then the other way that it's different is that it's a verein, so it's a members association. So in a way, it's like you don't have as abstract an idea of what the audience is that you're talking to. It's 1,400 people that are all members of the Kunstverein, plus the regular, let's say, public that's coming, plus the people who are viewing, through social media or through our website or through our publications. So it's quite different here or there.
Yeah, and you never thought to use also the website, or at least commissioning, I don't know, works, digital works to artists. I'm just thinking, this morning I was in the surfing the website of the Serpentine Gallery. As you know, they develop now these new commissions to artists of works existing only on the digital realm. Cecil B. Evans was the first, and the Yan Cheng was the second one. I mean, do you feel it from an institutional perspective, something like interesting for you, for your interest, or you feel more a kind of must do, considering the actual scenario?
Well, we do things like, for example, one thing that we accomplished just recently was we changed the hold music on our telephone line. And the telephone line to me in the Kunstverein was an interesting sight because like most institutions, or let's say most people, don't even bother with landlines anymore. But in the Kunstverein, like everybody's phone connects to another person's, and we have this whole internal call system, and then also people are constantly calling into the Kunstverein, especially our members. And so people get put on hold a lot. So we actually asked Eric Taste, this artist from Brussels, who's also a composer, he's a psychiatrist, he's running a hospital. I mean, it's like, author, kind of a polymath. We asked him if he would let us put one of his compositions onto our telephone hold line. And then for our website, it's actually already designed by an artist. The artist, David Reinfurt from Dexter Sinister, is the one who makes it. And he's constantly adding new features into it. Like recently on the homepage, there was a kind of very central logo. And that logo is now turned into a kind of Twitter feed, which so far we've been using it more, like as for a place for announcements and things. But that will slowly sort of morph and devolve into a place for much different kinds of messages. They're also working on some other features, which will sort of be kind of create a new way of navigation, which will sort of bypass all the clicking that you have to do. But as far as in commissioning artists to directly work within the website, that we haven't done that yet, no.
And what's your position regarding these kind of online exhibitions, virtual exhibitions, digital works? I mean, I'm of course referring to something different from what you just mentioned, what you just did on the Kunstverein page. And last week we had as a guest Arti Virkant, and so we were really discussing about different examples of these virtual exhibitions, and also in a kind of critical way, nothing as most of these projects in a way use the web as a platform, but then in terms of content of the works, it seems that basically everything can be, you can replace everything, since they are more kind of about sort of conceptual or process-based works and exhibitions. And I think this is maybe the also kind of critical aspect of most of these exhibitions. Also the fact that nowadays, especially like big museums or institutions, need to play their part on that. Of course, the Kunstverein is a smaller scale institution. You have a kind of different freedom of operate, but I'm not like skeptical at all on or I'm not kind of naive. I think there are big kind of potential of using the digital, and of course for a museum with a collection, the idea of creating an archive, so that we shift into another issue, like how the idea of an archive and how to filter and to share with an audience a collection through images. And so of course is a very big question. I was just curious to hear your position, if it's something you experience as a kind of exciting thing, or if you had some certain specific projects that you found kind of compelling or not.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think one of the nice things about if you're working in entirely digital media and working with other platforms that aren't, brick and mortar spaces, is that you can just bypass the whole system in the first place. I mean, that was the sort of goal of correspondence art, as I understand, or mail art, was that you don't need a gallery, you don't need a museum. You can just, create your own network and communicate back and forth in that way. And I think that that's actually, for me, the most exciting is actually when someone sort of like makes me and what I do irrelevant by, going in through some other channel. And what I don't like is when virtual spaces replicate brick and mortar spaces, because I feel like then you're just getting into a skeuomorphic kind of situation. Like the worst example being like the iCal, where you see the sort of like leather and ripped pages on an Apple computer, when the whole idea of a calendar could have been like completely upended and tilted in a more interesting way that might actually make make it easier to sort of manage events and time in everybody's lives. So just like sort of to me, what the promise of a wholly digital art that is that it doesn't actually need the legitimization of institutions or the space that an institution can bring. That said, I think that there could be more done in Kunstverein. I mean, one of the things that we do most of the time is like constantly scanning and digitizing just information from our own archive, because that work hasn't been really done to a full extent yet. And that's going to take probably the entire time that I'm there, and maybe one or two directorships afterwards. There's so much work to be done there. And it might be that through that process is when those kind of practices are given a bit more of a platform, a bit more space through the Kunstverein's website. But as far as a position, of course, I like it when anyone can bypass the sort of channels that have always been in place, particularly something like the Kunstverein, which is like almost 200 years old. So I'm usually looking forward to seeing it.
I don't know if we have some questions from the audience or our virtual friends.
I can't see anything, so I don't know who's there.
It's like a big, it's the big room full of people, so, but they are all very shy. And maybe I have a last question, but this is again, is not about what you did, but your opinion about, I mean, from your, it's more kind of a specific question about exhibition making, about the fact that with the trend of these reenactments exhibition of reenacting works and exhibitions, the fact that all of them are based then on images, and the fact that you really, I mean, art, or most of the most interesting exhibitions we know and performances, actually we know through a rumor, not by images. And in a way, they develop within our knowledge, kind of personal system of knowledge, and how instead this, I was thinking specifically about when Atius becomes forms, because of course the curator, Germano Schelland, who decided to restage, witness alive that exhibition, but in terms of really exhibition making, of make the exhibition happen, they work on images. And so what was your, and of course then a lot of people, they were not in Venice, so they look at that exhibition through images. So of course he always create this effect of mise en abîme. And I was, I'm curious to know your opinion about that specific exhibition.
Well, of course, it's a landmark exhibition, the original one. It's probably the most expensive book on my shelf is the original catalog of that show. And of course, everybody will probably remain forever fascinated by that show, because it really was so kind of free and so full of things and had such a great effect. But I think it's really boring to restage it. I understand the impulse. Of course, you want to, see how does it resonate again in the presence, what might it have been looking like. But it just looked like, a Barbie doll version of a landmark exhibition. And what I prefer much more are things like, Jeff Cornelius, when he's making TV programs that document things, or you mentioned the John Berger, things like Responsive Eye or Ways of Seeing. It's much more interesting to look at real documents that actually sort of showed it through some kind of a perspective than trying to restage it similar to what it actually was. Because I think, it had its moment and we can kind of piece it together. But I kind of like how it sort of existed through rumor, through a few spare images, through a few catalogs, through some accounts, through some clips of video. And then when you see it kind of restaged years later, it's kind of like when you see the Rolling Stones play live now, like it's not cool. And that's just my opinion. I think, it's like, you can't, not even all the works are there. So to me, that's just not, it's not interesting. There's already like, enough artists coming up today that need to be shown. And restaging it just feels a bit sad to me somehow.
Yeah. Also, the funny thing is actually that the real works look more as a real images. The works. At least for me, I see it more a kind of essay, a catalog with the images live. So it was a kind of 3D catalog. So in a way, it was a very digital kind of advanced exhibition in that sense. A bit too expensive, maybe.
Yeah, probably if you put that like in those weird Google glasses that they make now, the cardboard ones. Have you seen those?
Yes.
When I first heard of it, I thought like that's such a dumb idea. But then when you actually look at it, it's like quite amazing. You could make a 3D catalog in there for sure.
Yeah. So, Chris, I think it's everything from our side. And so it's 8 o'clock, also in Rome, so I think you can enjoy the old city.
I definitely will.
So thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Okay.
Take care.
Ciao.
Ciao.